thank you everyone who's here and who's filling in now for coming to Legacy Lecture. I'm sure you already know what it is because I've been spamming it like crazy, especially this last week. But basically, each year, starting around mid-fall, we hold a poll that goes till the end of winter, and it's a multi-tiered poll. Like we have a few breaks to collect and recollect votes. Um, but we asked students who their favorite professors are. And not this year, but last year, Professor Niema was voted favorite professor for the poll, and we were going to reach out to him for Legacy Lecture, and then COVID happened. So we reached out to him this year instead, since we're a little bit more well adapted, and he graciously said yes to presenting the Legacy Lecture, which is just a lecture with the prompt, if this were your very last lecture, what would you share with the world? We don't know anything about this. This is all Nima. That's all he has to go off of. So it's going to be super exciting. I really hope y'all enjoy it. Um, he's put in a lot of time to preparing this, I'm sure, and it's going to be a blast. So Professor Nima is an assistant teaching professor in computer science and engineering. He has a research focus in bioinformatics. So currently he's doing data analysis of COVID-19 sequences, and I think that's awesome. So I hope he has some super interesting. Well, I don't hope. I know he has some super interesting stuff to share with us. But without further ado, you can jump right in, Professor Nima.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and thank you for having me. Let me just bump you back down real quick just to make this. There we go. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. I know that pandemic time, you probably don't want to spend too much of your free time doing school related things. And it's a Saturday as well, so double whammy. So I really appreciate everyone that decided to come out. Just a heads up that this session is being recorded. So what I'm going to be doing, the structure of this talk is going to be roughly 40 minutes of just me lecturing. And then I'm going to save the remaining portion of the time dedicated to Q&A. So after I finish the lecture portion, I'll stop recording, and then that way you can ask your questions kind of privately. We can have some discussions, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I'm very eager to get started. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, the prompt, it was super interesting. If this was my very last lecture, what would I share with the world? So I had to do a little bit of thinking, and hopefully I've come up with something that you'll enjoy. So here's just a general outline of this lecture. I'm going to start by telling you my own journey of how I got to where I am today. And then I'm going to talk about this pipeline metaphor that's commonly used to describe the path towards a career in a given field. And then I'm going to give you some advice regarding your own academic and professional journeys. And then lastly, I'm going to end with some concluding thoughts just to kind of like tie everything together. So first, I want to talk about my journey that I took to get to where I am today. So in general, and so also I'm going to kind of center this talk around a series of quotes that I find personally important to me, and it'll kind of give structure to the talk and give context for things. So the first quote that I want to bring up, this is one of the most frequent questions I receive from students in the classes that I teach, and it's the following: have you always known what you want that you wanted to go into computer science? So let me just step backwards a little bit, take a trip down memory lane. So I've always been interested in technology. And in elementary school, I remember I had a Game Shark little cheat system for my Game Boy Color. And I remember I would ride on the school bus, and then kids from all over the school would basically be sitting all around the bus and pass their Pokemon games to me so that I could plug in my cheat engine and then get them like 99 Master Balls or like level up their Pokemon or whatever hacks they wanted on their game. And kind of this interest with tinkering with technology, it continued into middle school and high school, where I would tinker with video game consoles just to kind of do things that they weren't designed to do. If any of you came to the recent ACM Cyber Talk, where we had Modern Vintage Gamer joining us, I discussed a little bit about my history in the video game hacking world. But yeah, so basically try to get them to do homebrew games, emulate older video game consoles. I was just kind of interested with tinkering and see what I could do with them. So in high school, actually, I became a tech for the Associated Student Body. And this is the photo from me and the other two techs. This was my sophomore year of high school. You can see my hair was a little bit longer back then. And basically, I would just kind of help record and edit videos, and I would run the school sound system for events, all that kind of just general technical stuff for any of our high school events. So one thing, so I grew up in San Diego, and I went to high school in the South Bay in Chula Vista. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that area. But in general, compared to the rest of San Diego County, the South Bay, the high schools are a little bit underserved. And like my high school, we didn't have AP computer science. We didn't really have computers on campus. So, in high school, I had no idea what computer science even was. I was just generally interested in technology, but I didn't know that there was really a career path in this. And on the contrary, both of my uncles and a bunch of my relatives are doctors. So growing up, I just was always super interested in the medical world. And all throughout my life, I was absolutely certain I wanted to be a doctor. And from my perspective, the technology stuff was just more of like a fun hobby that I would do on the side. But my academic and professional goals were completely in the world of medicine. So then fast forward a little bit to when I graduated. So this was my high school graduation photo. This is like all my homies in high school. And so I graduated from high school in 2011, and I actually committed to UC San Diego for a bachelor's degree in human biology. So I'm a UCSD alum as well. And I was set on the pre-med track, and I was confident like this is definitely what I want to pursue. So early on in fall quarter, during my freshman year, one of my suite mates was taking CSE 8A, which for people that are maybe familiar with the computer science classes at UCSD, this is the intro programming class, like the very first course that CS people take, where you just learn introductory Java programming. And he was working on one of his programming assignments on our couch in the dorm. And I was just kind of curious to see what he was working on because he was just like tinkering away at his laptop and I was just watching TV. So I was like, I'll just pop my head over and see what he's doing. And I saw that he was trying to write his name using these like digital turtles that were on the computer screen. And that just completely blew my mind that like he was taking a class where his actual homework assignment was to write a program that makes turtles draw his name. I had no idea what this class was. I had no idea what computer science was. But just the concept of such a thing just completely intrigued me. So immediately I looked up all of the UCSD majors and I wanted to see what majors had that specific class, but also had all of the pre-med requirements. And completely blindly, I switched into what's called the bioinformatics major. Back then it wasn't impacted, but I didn't know what bioinformatics was. I didn't know what computer science was. I just knew I was pre-med. I wanted to take that class. I didn't want to waste time taking classes that were out of my major. So I was like, oh, I should probably change majors into something that has it. In hindsight, probably not the most thought out decision, but I got really lucky with that one. Okay, so I switched into the major. And then in spring 2012, I took my first CSE course. So I dabbled with technology stuff when I was in high school, but I didn't have any formal programming background. I didn't know what computer science was. I didn't really know what it constituted. And already it was spring quarter and I felt kind of behind on my CSE courses for the bioinformatics major because up to that point, I'd only taken like biology, chemistry, physics, those types of classes. So I decided I would just jump straight into CSE 11, which is the accelerated pace introductory programming course. I jumped straight into this course and I thought, I should hopefully be decently well off because of my background. But during the first 4 weeks of the course, I was barely able to keep up with the rest of the students. So I was able to kind of understand the general logic. So I understood like, what is the logic behind an if statement? What is the logic behind the for loop? But there were so many small details that I just wasn't aware of, such as like very specific Java syntax. Like, why do I have to put a semicolon here? Or like, why is this curly bracket here versus this other part has parentheses? I just didn't know that stuff because I never learned it. And during class, I felt super lost. But with the specific instructor I was taking, every time I would ask a question, the instructor would make comments like, you're supposed to know these details before taking this class. And like kind of unwelcoming messages rather than just helping me understand what I was missing. So I didn't really feel like I could turn to anybody for help. And actually at the end of week 4, after getting pretty low scores on the first 2 programming assignments and struggling with the third one, I just decided to drop the course. So here, this is a screenshot from my academic history. I keep track of like all my files from all the courses I've taken. And you'll see CSE 11, I dropped it that spring quarter. And this is something I don't usually tell people about. I usually tell people I started computer science my sophomore year, but really the first computer science course I took was spring of my freshman year that I dropped like with a very low grade in the class. Fortunately, it didn't show up on my transcript because I dropped it before week 4, but yeah. And at that point, I was kind of freaking out because the biology majors back then were the impacted ones and the engineering ones were not impacted. So basically, from my perspective, I thought I had switched into this field that I was too stupid for. I didn't think I could succeed in computer science. And I couldn't easily switch back into biology. Um, so I was kind of just venting to my roommate who had taken that CSE 8A course, the one that got me interested in this first place. And he urged me like, wait, calm down a little bit. And he told me that this specific instructor that I had taken is just kind of, this instructor was known for making comments like that and maybe not being the most inclusive. But he said that there's this other instructor, Rick Ord, who's extremely supportive and who's an awesome teacher. So he urged me, just don't give up yet. Take one more class with Rick Ord, though, specifically, and then see if you still like the field. And then after that, maybe then consider freaking out. So I pulled up the schedule of classes and I looked at what is being offered that Rick Ord is teaching. And it was actually for the following fall quarter. And the only class he was planning on teaching that I could enroll in was CSE 21, which if anyone is familiar with the computer science major, basically normally you take CSE 8A, 8B, 12, 15L, 20, and then you take 21. So this is usually like the fifth computer science course that people take. But fortunately for me, the only official prerequisite on the course is CSE 20, which was not a bioinformatics major requirement. And like back then, for whatever reason, the CS department was a little bit more relaxed with petitions. So somehow I petitioned to just jump straight into CSE 21 without having taken any other CS courses. And I slipped through the cracks or something because they approved the petition. So fast forward to fall quarter, my petition was miraculously approved. So basically I walk into the first lecture. So this was back in fall 2012. And the class was in Ledden Auditorium over in Muir. I don't know if anyone here has explored campus yet, just because we've been in a pandemic for a year and a half. But Ledden Auditorium, it's this like big cement lecture hall where the lecture hall is underground. Like you enter from ground level and then you go all the way down and then probably like 1 or 2 stories down is the actual podium that the instructor teaches from. So I was in this like dark cement lecture hall that was like super steep. And there were all these faces that I didn't recognize just because this was like the 5th CS course in the series. So everyone here had already taken all the other classes. And I kept hearing conversations about like, oh man, CSE 12 was super hard, huh? Like, how did you do in that class? So I just kept hearing people talking about how hard the other courses were. And I was like, oh crap. I made a huge mistake. What am I doing here? I don't belong here. This was a big mistake. I don't know why I was listening to my friend. So lecture was about to start and I see the instructor, Rick Ord, walk up to the podium. And I was kind of nervous that just like the CSE 11 instructor I had taken, he would start by listing a bunch of complicated prerequisite skills that I didn't know and would try to like scare me into dropping the class because I didn't belong. But instead, to my surprise, he did the exact opposite. And this is a second quote. This is probably one of the most important quotes in my academic career. Instead of trying to intimidate us, he told us his story about how he got into computer science. And he shared with us that he himself, this renowned UC San Diego computer scientist, he struggled immensely with computer science courses when he was taking them. And he told us that he was only able to make it through by kind of like befriending the smartest people in the class in order to make it into their study groups and to learn from the best of the best. He said that he always struggled and he just studied his ass off to like be able to succeed through those courses. And so the quote that I will always remember, he ended his introduction with a statement that gave me courage to continue. He said, "I'm just a simple boy from the Midwest. And if I can do it, you can do it too." So I thought, okay, this guy, he's in the same boat that I was, or I'm in the same boat that he was. And he seems welcoming enough. So maybe I'll just give this computer science thing another shot. So fast forward 10 weeks, that quarter still ended up being one of the most brutal quarters of my undergraduate experience. I just was trying to like rush through my classes. I should not have taken biology with the third organic chemistry, with physics lab, with a physics course, with one of the challenging computer science courses. So if people think I'm like a straight A student in all the classes that I've taken, definitely not. But I want to highlight CSE 21, I got an A in. That was the one course that I was freaking out about. And the other courses, organic chemistry, I still despise. So, I'll take that C. I'll run with it. But against all odds, I was able to not only pass my computer science course, but actually get an A in it, despite this being like the fifth course of the series. So I figured, you know what, maybe I can handle this. Maybe this is a good field for me. And I'm just going to continue with the bioinformatics major. And throughout undergrad, I also tried getting some bioinformatics research experience just to get a little bit of a better picture of what exactly is bioinformatics. But still, I was dead set on becoming a doctor. I just thought like, okay, this major is good for me. It'll help me sustain myself as I pursue being a doctor. So I continued along that pre-med route throughout undergrad, and I even took the MCAT. I studied for it my junior year. I took it during my junior year, and I even applied to med school programs, MD programs, in the summer just after my junior year. So just before my senior year. And at this point, I was still dead set on going to medical school. And, I had done a little bit of bioinformatics research, but I wasn't too sure what exactly it is. I just saw that, one of the labs that I worked in, they were interested in looking at three-dimensional protein structures, but it was a little bit boring to me, honestly. I didn't know what you could theoretically do with bioinformatics. And I was interested in medicine, and it wasn't clear to me, how can you actually apply it to medicine? So during the senior year of the bioinformatics major, that's when you really take the majority of your core bioinformatics courses. So prior to my senior year, I had actually taken one of the bioinformatics courses. It was Math 186 with Glenn Tesler, shown on the left here. And it was basically a statistics course where I was getting an idea of how computation can intersect with biology, but it was primarily still just a straight up stats course where the examples were just motivated by biological applications. So I still wasn't sure how computer science comes into play until my senior year. But then during fall of my fourth year, and this was really what opened my eyes to what bioinformatics could be, I took CSE 82 with Vineet Bhakna, who was like he ended up being one of my biggest mentors throughout the later parts of my undergrad and throughout my PhD even. But I took this class with him and I was just completely blown away. We were basically taking all these principles that I had learned from my computer science courses and then applying them to the molecular biology that I had learned in my bio courses, and kind of meshing them into this really interesting intersection between these two worlds. And most importantly to me, all of his problems were motivated by medicine. At this point, I thought medicine is one thing, technology is one thing, and these are completely non-intersecting worlds. But I didn't realize that you can actually take algorithmic approaches and use them to come up with clinically relevant information. So then while I was taking CSE 182, I was also taking a course, Bang 183, in the bioengineering department with Sheng Zhang. He's the second from the right in the slide. And basically, this is a bioengineering course that it tied together engineering principles with molecular biology. So we learned about the bioengineering that went behind modern sequencing technologies. We learned about different assays, like different sensing metrics that you can use to actually measure biological data. And just seeing engineering applied to molecular biology was also very, very crazy to me. So by the fall of 2014, I finished these initial bioinformatics. Oh, by the end of fall of 2014, I finished these first bioinformatics courses that I took, but I still didn't have any interview invitations for medical school. And for people that might not be familiar with the medical school process, usually you should start getting interviews around like December-ish. Sometimes you'll get a little bit in January or February, but it was around December and I still didn't have any. So I was like, I probably want to have a backup option. So because I started gaining an interest in these bioinformatics courses, I decided I would apply to some master's programs in bioinformatics, just as a safety net in case I didn't get into any MD programs. I would do a master's, then maybe reapply to medical school. However, and this was kind of the main turning point for me, in winter 2015, I took CSE 181 with Pavel Pevsner, and I truly found my passion. So the course itself, it was by far one of the most rigorous algorithms and programming courses I ever took. So for people that have maybe taken an intro CS class or something, so CSE 181, we had like 20 programming assignments a week. So they were all little problems, but they were actually like pretty challenging. And I was spending easily like 20 to 30 hours per week on that class. And I'm like a pretty strong programmer. So it was a very challenging class. But what was amazing to me was we basically learned all of the fundamental problems in bioinformatics. And specifically, the whole structure of the course was centered around basically, let's introduce this biomedical problem purely as a biomedical problem. And then let's try to transform it into a computational problem. And he would always have his lecture slides with like taking away some of the biological mumbo jumbo keywords and making it a formal computational problem. And then we would focus on the algorithms that would solve that computational problem. And then once we solved the computational problem, we would apply the results back to the original biomedical problem. And that connection just completely clicked with me. It showed me you can definitely apply computation to medicine. And it showed me like, I think this is where the future is going to go. People are going to get sequenced every day, or, maybe in 50 years we'll get to that point. But I was sure that sequencing would become a staple, and being able to connect these two worlds would be extremely important to the impact on medicine. So this was kind of when I decided I'm not totally sure I actually want to go to med school. Maybe I actually want to pursue this as my full-time thing. So I just want to, before I continue, emphasize, I had this realization of what I might potentially want to do at the end of my winter quarter of my senior year. So this was literally months before I was set to graduate. Okay, so by the end of my senior year, I didn't receive a single MD interview invitation. And this screenshot, the screen got cut off. It only shows the first 24 programs that I applied to because I couldn't fit all of the ones that I got applied to but rejected from on one screen. But I was rejected from all 45 MD programs that I applied to without even getting a single interview. And in hindsight, this actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. Had I gotten accepted into an MD program, I probably would have just gone down that route, and I wouldn't have even continued exploring this world of bioinformatics. But at that time, it was a super brutal blow to my confidence. I thought like, crap, my whole life I set up for this specific goal, and I didn't get it. I didn't make the cut. So prior to this, I was certain I wanted to pursue an MD, but I didn't get a single interview. But I was accepted into every single bioinformatics master's program that I applied to. So I was starting to think like, okay, maybe one of these two things is a slightly better fit for me. So one of the master's programs that I had gotten accepted to, I was having some back and forth with one of the professors in that program. And it turns out that their program also had a PhD program, and they had one open seat in their PhD program because one of the people that they were trying to admit ended up rejecting their offer. So they had this open PhD position, and one of the professors asked me, well, you have background research experience and you have a strong computational background. Would you be interested in doing a PhD in our program instead? So for me, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I decided, you know what, I didn't get into a single medical school. So let me just try this out. Let's just see what happens. So actually so not only did I move out of San Diego to go to this other program that was in a completely other state, but I actually did 3 weeks of coursework. And I was working in this program, and I was realizing actually that this program that I got into also was not a good fit, right? So it was kind of ironic because I thought, oh, MD route is not really the best fit for me. I did some shadowing in undergrad. I didn't really like it. But I pursued this PhD program, and this was also not a very good fit for me. They were very focused on like parsing clinical records, but they weren't as interested in like the fundamental low-level molecular biology and the kind of core algorithms that I was interested in. So I was freaking out because I was like, I just signed up for another program that I'm also now having this like, I'm not sure what I want to do moment. What do I do? So fortunately for me, yet one more miracle to just kind of throw into my collection of miraculous things that helped me get to where I am today. I was able to move back to San Diego because I spoke with the bioinformatics program coordinator at the UCSD bioinformatics program, who was Vineet Bafna at the time. I showed him a couple slides ago. He was my professor in undergrad. And I told him like, hey, I'm in this other program. It's not the best fit for me. They're doing some cool stuff that they're interested. That's totally fine for them. But I'm more interested in these types of traditional bioinformatics problems. Is there any way that I can come back to UCSD for the UCSD bioinformatics program, for the PhD program? And fortunately, I think they also had an open spot because someone had turned down their offer or something. Somehow they had a seat that I was able to sneak into. So literally 3 weeks after I started that other program, I just moved back to San Diego and was able to start the bioinformatics and systems biology PhD program at UCSD, just kind of at the very last minute. So that actually ended up being the program that I stuck with. But even then, my entire story, hopefully you picked up, that was riddled with things that I wasn't sure about. I entered the bioinformatics program at UCSD thinking I wanted to do cancer tumor classification using gene expression data, like a very specific niche of bioinformatics. And I ended up completely switching gears to doing mathematical modeling of evolution and focusing more on viruses. So something I had no idea I was interested in, that I didn't figure out I was interested in until like 2 years into my PhD. So fast forward a few more years, and then in June 2019, I successfully defended my PhD. And my primary research advisor, Siavash Mirab, he's shown on the left in this figure. He mentored me on some cool projects related to HIV evolution and epidemiology. And my co-advisor, Pavel Pevsner, he's the second on the left. He was the guy in the cowboy hat you saw a few more slides ago. He was the key person who sparked my interest into bioinformatics algorithms in the first place. And he's really the person that showed me that online education is this really cool thing that I could do. So also to the far right, so on the other side of me, is Joel Wertheim, who was a member of my PhD committee. And he was my primary mentor for the virology aspects of my research. And even today, as Luke mentioned when he introduced me, I'm working on some projects related to how do we speed up the analysis of COVID-19 sequence data. So it was really this group of three guys that got me super interested in what I'm doing today. So you might think, okay, Niema was lost all the way through his career, but somehow he stumbled in the right place and now it's all smooth sailing, to which I would say absolutely not, right? So here is a slide that I've put screenshots of the professor jobs that I applied to. So I finished my PhD, and towards the end of it, I applied to professor jobs. And even that was riddled with failure. Here's a screenshot of the spreadsheet that I used to keep track. And the only like good entries here are the purple ones that say interview, meaning that the department invited me for an interview. The ones that say rejected mean they straight up emailed me telling me that we don't want you. And the ones that say submitted, either in green or in blue, they didn't even get back to me. I submitted my application and just dead silence. And to this day, I think the most recent rejection email I've gotten from these jobs was like a couple months ago. So like I'm still getting those rejection emails from something I applied to like 2 years ago. So that's kind of funny. So again, this was cut off. I have a lot more failures than just this. I applied to 58 professor job openings. I only received in-person interviews from 6 of them, and I only got offers from 3 of them. But doesn't matter. All I needed was the one success, which was from the UCSD computer science department. And here I am today. So you might be thinking, okay, now Niema figured it out. He got his job. It's all smooth sailing from there. And I do have a lot of successes, right? So even today, I've applied for quite a few grants in my first couple years as a professor, and a lot of those grant applications were successful. But I want to emphasize that even today, every single one of my successes, like for every single one of my successes, there's a bunch of failures. So roughly twice as many grants have been rejected than accepted. So even today, it's just a matter of playing the numbers game. Just keep applying for stuff, keep shooting my shot, and hopefully, eventually you get enough successes and you just try not to let the failures get to you. So to kind of sum up my personal journey aspect of this talk, the quote that I like to summarize my experiences pretty well is from Finding Nemo. In life, there's always going to be ups and downs, and all you have to do is just keep swimming. You just got to go through the downs, and eventually there's going to be some ups in your life as well. Okay, so that was the first part of my talk. That was my journey of how I got here. So now I want to talk about something known as the pipeline. And to preface this one, to give context, again, I want to use a quote. So I do a lot of mathematical modeling, and this is one of my absolute favorite quotes as somebody who does mathematical modeling. The quote is, essentially, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And first, for this discussion, I want to really emphasize the all models are wrong part. Not most models. Every single model you ever have seen is wrong. So in a bunch of fields, including STEM, people commonly use the metaphor of comparing career trajectories to a pipeline. You try to engage people when they're young, such as kindergarten through 9th grade. Then you try to recruit them to actively learn about topics or work on projects in this field, maybe during 7th through 12th grade. And then you try to retain their presence in the field through a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a doctorate. maybe you'll have an associate's degree or some certificates along the way. And then ultimately, the goal is to sustain their presence in the field throughout their career. And in general, hand in hand with this metaphor, we have what are called leaks. So basically, the thought process is as long as someone enters the pipeline, ideally, they should hopefully remain in the pipeline all the way through and then come out the other side with a career in the field. But people can leak out of the pipeline for a plethora of reasons, many of which are systemic. So first, I kind of want to poke at the aspects of the model that are either wrong or insufficient. So my number one problem with this metaphor is that it's far too rigid. This is not at all a good way of, kind of presenting all the ways that you can get into a field. And you can see that it's rigid because, like, what if someone just wasn't interested in computers when they were in K through 9? Or maybe someone wasn't interested in biology during high school, but later on during their bachelor's degree decided, I really want to become a doctor. A bachelor's degree is not too late to enter and pursue a given field. But with this rigid pipeline, like, you don't ever enter a pipeline, like, right? A pipe is metal. You don't ever go into it along the way. So what I really hate about this metaphor is that it doesn't really give you the flexibility of entering a trajectory when you are ready for it, right? Even after college, you might work in one field for a while and then later realize you want to pursue something that's completely different. And that's totally okay. So also, the other thing that I really dislike about this is that by representing people who leave the pipeline as leaks, there's kind of two very problematic things about this in my mind. First, a leak is a negative thing. No one is excited that their pipes are leaking, right? So in my mind, treating a leak, leaving a given trajectory as a negative thing is really, really unhelpful because it has a negative connotation and it kind of stigmatizes the thought of leaving a field. Maybe someone leaves a field because they're just not interested in it. Maybe they found out later on that this isn't right for me, like I did. That's totally fine. And also, maybe there's systemic inequities that need to be fixed, but because of these systemic inequities, someone just was unable to pursue the field that they were interested in. There's nothing wrong with this person, but the system has to be improved to be able to maintain them throughout it. And then also, kind of one last scenario that I want to talk about is sometimes you might leave a given trajectory, but then later realize that you actually wanted to go back into that. And that's also totally fine, and it shouldn't be stigmatized. So this notion of representing deviations from the trajectory as leaks, I'm just not a big fan of. I think it's important to try to focus on systemic issues that prevent people from pursuing something when they actually do want it, but don't stigmatize people that just weren't interested or for whatever reason chose not to pursue it. Okay, so I get pretty heated about that aspect. So I kind of ripped apart the parts that I don't like. But now I kind of want to shift focus to the some are useful part of this quote. So there's a bunch of things I dislike about this metaphor, but one of the properties of it that I actually really, really like is its simplicity, right? The simplicity is a negative aspect because it kind of makes it seem as if you can't pursue it if you decide later on. But also in terms of recruiting people when they're young or maybe getting people interested, this exact simplicity also has its benefits, right? If I was introducing like an elementary school kid that like, what is bioinformatics? What do I do for research? If I started by trying to show them all of the potential career trajectories they could take and all of the different routes that they could try to get there, they would be completely overwhelmed. So by showing them this simple roadmap, one of the benefits is that it makes it seem maybe a little bit more attainable. Like, oh, I just have to enter this pipeline and hopefully I'll be able to succeed. So I do see the merit of introducing this trajectory using the simplistic model because despite its oversimplicity, at least it gives young students a rough idea of kind of some of the key steps they should keep in mind. Like maybe they should be thinking, oh, I should pursue a bachelor's degree in one of these majors, even if those choices end up changing later on. So ideally, if we could have some more flexible metaphor that's just as simple, that would be my ideal middle ground. Okay, so that's me poking holes at that single specific metaphor. So now with all that in mind, with my own journey and with what I dislike and what I like about this common metaphor that people use, I want to talk about your journey. And this is a quote that my dad used to always tell me growing up. And one thing that I like about it, so first of all, the quote is, luck is when you've prepared yourself so that when an opportunity appears, you're ready to take advantage of it. And so you've probably heard some of these like work hard quotes like I make my own luck. And one thing that I don't like about quotes like I make my own luck is that it completely makes it seem as though, you know, so part of it is that you need to work hard and prepare yourself. But part of reality is also just kind of acknowledging that sometimes in life, many of the opportunities that are thrown your way are pretty much just chance events, right? Quotes like "I make my own luck" disregards any privileges that someone has. Like sometimes you're just able to accept a job opportunity because it's thrown at you for no control of your own. And what I like about this quote is it has the hard work aspect, you've prepared yourself, but it also has this kind of chance notion of it, which this chance aspect is really the definition of privilege to me. Sometimes opportunities are made available or unavailable to a given person purely because of their circumstances that were completely out of their control. And one thing that I feel is that it's important for everyone here to hopefully recognize your own privileges, right? Everyone here probably found out about this talk because they're a UCSD student. UCSD is a very high ranking university, and somehow you all have made it here through a combination of hard work that you've put in, but also other opportunities that have presented themselves to you that you were able to take advantage of. So like recognizing your own privileges and kind of reflecting on what factors opened up these opportunities to you, but maybe potentially not to other people. And kind of the big, like, hopefully you've noticed one of my main messages is that in life, there's very rarely a one size fits all answer. I've tried a bunch of different one size fits all answers and none of them fit for me. And sometimes what's a right career path for one person doesn't necessarily fit perfectly for someone else. And really, regardless of what path you end up choosing, just keep self-reflecting and make sure that every step that you take is something that works best for you. So the quote that I like for this is from Jason Mraz. He says, "You do you and I do me." Okay, so that's kind of, I said my side, I talked about the metaphor, I gave some insights into your own journey, recognizing your own privilege and picking a path that really is self-inspired. It makes the most sense for you personally. And I want to just kind of end with some concluding thoughts that, again, I'm going to have some quotes that, I'll have a quote that sets the stage for this. So actually, when I was 6 years old, I watched the Pokemon, the first movie in theaters. And one of the quotes from that movie, despite it being a cartoon for children, was weirdly profound for a kid's movie. And it just kind of stuck with me all my life. So towards the end of the movie, basically, Mewtwo, who's really the antagonist throughout the movie, he has this profound realization and he says the following. He says, "I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It's what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are." And, this really hit me, maybe because I was 6 years old. But basically, I've tried to live my life according to this philosophy. So I have some calls to action, hopefully, that people that are here will think about and maybe try to incorporate into your own lives. So one call to action that I have is, first, try to recognize and acknowledge the privileges that you enjoy. So recognizing one's privilege, I want to just kind of emphasize, it doesn't in any way take away from your accomplishments. Your accomplishments are your own. You worked hard for those accomplishments, and no one can take that away from you. But rather, by recognizing the privileges that you've had, it lets you reflect on the chance events that maybe opened up some opportunities to you through external circumstances. And then with that in mind, I implore you all to use the privileges that you just recognized to try to make the world a better place. And this can take many shapes and forms. Maybe you'll give a talk at a high school, maybe in an underserved community of some sort, to show students the wonders of your field. So for example, in my high school, none of my classmates knew what computer science was. And I was kind of handy with computers because my dad happened to be an electrical engineer. But none of my classmates ever got that experience. But if someone from UCSD went to that high school and maybe talked about what they do from day to day, what are the career paths someone could take, it could have had a profound impact on those students. So maybe instead of that, you'll do outreach events. Like, for example, I volunteer at Salk Education, not during the pandemic, unfortunately, but every now and then Salk Institute has these events where they invite a bunch of K through 12 kids and just kind of have workshops where they can learn about different aspects of biology. or maybe you do something completely different. It's totally up to you, whatever fits your own, uh, your own interest the best. But just the commonality is, I implore you, try to use your own privileges to create privilege for other people. And lastly, I would not have pursued computer science if I didn't have a mentor that welcomed me when I was feeling discouraged and kind of made that setting inclusive for me. So I want to ask you to hopefully be somebody else's simple boy from the Midwest. Mentor someone who you see maybe feels discouraged or afraid to try something, and try to welcome them to your field in an inclusive manner. So, a quote that I want to kind of end my talk on, this is by far my favorite quote of all time. So, this is from The Lord of the Rings. This is a quote that it's a conversation between Sam Gamgee and Frodo Baggins. But basically, folk in these stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't because they were holding on to something. And then Frodo says, "What are we holding on to, Sam?" And Sam says, "There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for."